Let's complete our discussion of national identity within a Canadian context with a summary and review of national identity and visions and a vision for Canada. So again, national identity is basically a collective identity. It's based on the linguistic, ethnic, cultural, religious, geographic, spiritual, and possibly political understandings of a nation. We talked about this at the very beginning of the course. Sometimes this understanding of national sometimes this understanding of national identity is combined with a view of a country that's also a civic nation. In other words, based on some specific political understandings. Japan's a good example of this. Japan is racially and ethnically and religiously homogeneous. In other words, Japan is made up of a population that is not diverse at all. It's basically racially and ethnically and religiously the same. They're Buddhist and Asian and ethnically Japanese, and yet they also see themselves as a country as a parliamentary democracy. And let's also consider when we discuss the idea of visions of national identity itself, that national identities evolve, particularly over time. And many national identities are evolving due to a number of reasons, such things as diversity, pluralism within a country's population, and for many countries these ideas of diversity and pluralism have impacted and led to an evolution in these countries' identities. Let's now consider again some possible visions of Canada. Well, first of all, most Canadians have a vision of Canada in which it's a pluralistic nation, in which there are many diverse ethnic and religious groups, and that these are all tolerated within a civic framework, one of the rule of law, of a liberal democracy, in which people are able to explore and promote their own ethnic identities within a political framework that's known as Canada. We've seen this as a result of the increase in immigration, and immigration now is coming in the vast majority from Asia as opposed to traditional areas such as Europe, and this has led to greater ethnic and racial diversity within the country. And as a result, Canada sees itself not only as being a diverse nation, but it also sees itself as a tolerant nation, a pluralistic nation, and it sees itself as a country with a great degree of tolerance. In fact, another vision of Canada, beyond being a pluralistic nation, is the vision that Canada is a nation made up or of nations. Many people, many groups in Canada see themselves as independent nations with the ability to govern themselves, such as the Aboriginal peoples and the Quebecois, and yet they fall within the political framework of an independent country known as Canada. And again, I mentioned the Quebec and Aboriginal peoples as examples of this. But what about North American integration? We talked in our last discussion in regards to the promotion of national identity and of national unity, and how such forces as economic globalization have impacted that. And as examples of that economic globalization, we talked about such things as the North American Free Trade Agreement, and that's led to and will lead to further integration of the three main economies of North America: Mexico, the United States, and Canada. And so that is going to impact a vision of Canada as time evolves. In fact, NAFTA and the Binational Planning Group, along with other political and economic elements within these three countries, have talked about and tried to facilitate greater integration within those three countries. And as those countries become, Canada, the United States, and Mexico, as they become more integrated economically, that is certainly going to impact national identity, and it's going to impact and lead to further developments of a vision for Canada. And again, we talked about globalization and how it's a very strong force in relation to national identity and impacting it. And it also will impact the vision that people have for their country and of their country, and that will certainly be the case for Canada. In fact, globalization has led to an increase in a cultural, we could say cosmopolitanism, where more people are more aware of different elements of culture around the world and how they're becoming more uniform in many ways. And in fact, cultural diversity has been more recognized. And this in and of itself, this globalization, this economic force, has led to an increase in cultural diversity within Canada. And as a result, it has become, the population of Canada, more culturally pluralistic, and Canada itself has become, as a result, more tolerant of such ethnic differences. What's your vision of Canada, and what's your vision of national identity for Canada? How do you see Canada's national identity now, and how do you see it developing in the future? How do you see your own identity as a Canadian? Certainly what you see yourself being, what you see your identity is as an individual and as part of a collective, as being a Canadian, is certainly different from what other individuals, perhaps even 5, 10, 20 years ago, saw as their own identity, and how they saw Canada itself. Well, these are important questions that you'll need to answer for yourself, and this is basically what the course has done. We've talked about the ideas of identity, how identity has both an individual and collective basis. We've talked about the sense of a group and the sense of nation. We've talked about nationalism and how groups have striven to become part of an independent sovereign country with their own ability to determine their own affairs. Well, we've gone even further. We've looked at ultranationalism and how in certain times in history that's gone haywire and led to great problems and great suffering. We've also looked at internationalism, the idea of cooperation between various nations to combat the challenges and issues facing the world today. And then we finally looked at a Canadian context in relation to identity, nation, nationhood, nationalism, and a vision for Canada. So now as you move forward, you may want to take these questions in mind and see how, for yourself, identity develops.